This is going to be the first resistance report in 6 months that we're not starting in Rafah. The IDF's operations in Rafah are limited to the Philadelphia corridor and the combat outposts along there that they have created. Of course, we saw last week in the coverage of Yahya Sinwar's death that the troops are still there, but they're not moving in the city and not carrying out operations in Rafah. So it makes sense that we're not seeing resistance videos for the first time in 6 weeks from that battle space. But let's take a look at the Gaza maps as we usually do to start. And as Nora said in her excellent news report, again, the attacks are happening all across Gaza. I've said this a number of times over these months. I'm going to focus on battle spaces and resistance spaces. But the civilian population in Gaza is subjected to aerial attack and artillery shelling anywhere they are in the Gaza Strip. There was attacks in all major cities and camps all across Gaza. They're attacking even in the Mawasi safe area. So that is still going on. There's more than 40 airstrikes a day in Gaza. That is a consistent number that has been happening for many months. It spiked a bit during the siege on Jabalia, which we'll get to, but I just want to point that out, that that's happening across Gaza, regardless of the particular areas that we focus in. So there's the Philadelphia corridor that we talked about, and that's where the Israeli positions are. We know from Yahya Sinwar and his last stand battle at Tel Sultan. There's an outpost there in Tel Sultan. There's another outpost between Tel Sultan and the Rafah crossing. And then, of course, in the south, the Kerem Shalom crossing, which is at the far bottom of that map that you see south of the Rafah crossing. That is the aid crossing that has been cut virtually off. And as we'll talk about in the north, aid to the north is completely cut off and has been for a 3-week siege, as Nora said. So looking up north, that's where we're going to focus this week. The Netzarim corridor you see there that has divided the Gaza Strip in half. The Netzarim corridor is, and I hope I say this every week. If I forget, it's not because it didn't happen. Every single week, the Netzarim corridor is targeted literally daily by the Joint Operations Room resistance factions with artillery, with mortar fire on the command positions along the Netzarim corridor. There was 50,000 people displaced from the north, from Jabalia and Beit Hanun. The people, only a small handful of people actually crossed through the checkpoints in the Netzarim corridor. People in the north did not leave the north. They remain in the north, but they were displaced. And this week has been a devastating week as a human being to watch what's going on in Gaza. Israel even prompted NPR, not exactly the most champion of Palestinian rights, wrote that the 3-week siege in the north has turned all of Gaza into a frontline killing zone. And that killing zone, as I described a few weeks back when this operation began under the justification by the IDF that people were going to the shelters and to the shelters that were in hospitals. The other shelters are in schools for the most part. But the shelters in the hospitals are also a critical part out in the courtyards, as we know from all of the hospital attacks across Gaza over the last 13 months. And so that happened in Jabalia and Kamel Adwan Hospital. Nora talked a little bit about that in her report. Everybody was marched out of Kamel Adwan Hospital. Israeli special forces took over the hospital. They detained all men and boys over the age of 13 years old. They put them all through scans, face scans, iris scans, and many staff and doctors were disappeared. We saw brutal pictures of stripped men in a crowd of humanity. Those people were taken from shelters. They were taken from the hospital courtyards. They were taken from the hospitals themselves. And the reason was, the justification was that there was some government organization happening inside these shelters where the IDF said people came to pick up food stamps, humanitarian equipment, and to complain about crime. That was the justification for the massacre, the besiegement of the north of Gaza, where the civil defense said not a loaf of bread, not a drop of water has entered in 3 weeks of this siege. More than 1,200 people have been killed in Jabalia alone in this time. As you see on the news, if you watch the right news, you see many times in massacres of 100 and more people dropping not just entire apartments, but entire apartment blocks, entire neighborhoods, street after street being attacked. It's been unbelievable what we watch, and the courage of the people in northern Gaza during this time. I'm going to talk about the resistance, but I want to always start with the resistance of the people who are going through this and who refuse to leave, even under Israeli orders. The displacement of 50,000 people from the shelters did not mean 50,000 people fled the north. According to the most up-to-date UN numbers, less than 100 people left the north in this time. 600 people were arrested in emptying out those shelters. And after the shelters were emptied, Israeli forces burned the shelters, and they reported that in their media. The Israeli Defense Forces reported that in their field reports. They weren't hiding it. They burned the shelters after they cleared them out, and they've already destroyed the other schools that weren't being shelters. They were destroyed earlier in the war. So it's a devastating situation in the north. And when we go to watch these resistance videos coming up, I want to just say that Haaretz reported, Israel's liberal daily reported this week, that IDF soldiers saw battle plans and got troop leading procedures that were framed around the general's plan, which is essentially to starve the Gaza Strip, force people to surrender, or they die. That is the essential general's plan. There's some that we talked about last week about the attempts to resettle. I don't give much credibility, but the plan to force starvation on the population until they surrender or die is what we're seeing. And so just to tee up the videos, you're going to see that is not, there is no surrendering happen, not from any demographic in Gaza. And least of all, in this case, what we're going to see with the fighters. So let's start at number one here. This is east of Jabalia city. You can see a fighter here moving in a building that's right on a road that has been pre-scouted by intelligence that as a tank route. He's hopping back. He's already carried the Shoah device and he's wired it. So when he's coming back in that scene, he's already carried the wire, and you can see the wire in front of him. You can see the detonator, and here comes a tank rolling down the road, a Merkava tank, and we have blurred this because the soldier is hanging out of the tank, he's riding outside the hatch of the tank, which is not going to go well, as you can see. And you can see in this, they're going to re-show it. You can see it blow the wall completely out of that building and send it into the air. It's an enormous explosion by a Qassam-designed, explosively formed penetrator, the Shoah. And the Shoah is going to be the main character. There's the wall. The Shoah is going to be the main character in this week's show. What we're seeing here is one of 13 Shoah attacks against Israeli tanks, just in Jabalia, just in the last 7 days since you've seen me last. 8 soldiers have been killed. And this is just by Shoah. So you can see him there waiting. He's in position, waiting for the moment to strike. After he sets it up, the soldier comes rolling in here. And in the audio track, the soldier sees something and starts firing right about there. You can see that puff of smoke. The tank-mounted machine gun fires on that building. But because the fighter is back, you saw him moving through the rubble. He's not in that spot when it gets fired on. And so that's obviously a devastating attack. It's not always exactly clear which incident the Israeli soldiers died in. They often delay announcing them. But that was a very significant operation that you saw there. So let's look at number 2. This is a detailed ambush. We might have to go through this one a couple times because it's really interesting. First of all, to notice, if you look on the left top, at the top there, you can see that newly spun tandem 85, and you can see how that weapon is made to take the old 85 millimeter warhead that is no longer useful and to add the secondary charge to it to make it a tandem charge. You can see by the fact that those are not painted that those are being manufactured. those have been manufactured since the last invasion of Jabalia in May. You can see the fighter holding an older one there, a more standard Yassin 105, and you can see they're painted and the painting has been marked. This guy's hammering the wall, and he's directly saying, he directly refers to the general's plan when he's doing that. He says, the general's plan, huh? As he's swinging that sledgehammer, he says, consider this the head of your soldiers. This guy's coming out to plant one of the Shoahs. There's multiple Shoahs being planted. Again, no audio track, trying to keep these videos up. That there's gunfire, tank fire through all of these movements as the fighters set up this ambush. It's an ambush of a convoy of D9 armored bulldozers. These fighters are getting into position. Interesting. We'll play it one more time so I can give you all the details of the dialogue that happens within the video. But this is being carried out by a task force group within the Qassam brigades called the Martyr Hadiya unit. So they're already naming their task force units. There they spot a Namr troop carrier from a distance. The troop carrier is leading the way and the tank follows up. They're going to fire on the tank with that tandem 85 that you saw. This looks a bit like an interception from the trophy system. It's fired from a far distance. It's difficult to tell, but it looks a bit like an intercept. So these fighters are saying that they're planning the operation. They say that this operation will be for the sacrifice of all the martyrs of the Jabaliya camp, our people of steadfastness. He said that they are patient and steadfast on their land, and we draw our strength from them. The fighters say, we draw our strength from them. This guy with the Yassin is heading out to, he's on lookout. He's the spotter for the armored convoy of D9 bulldozers that are carrying with them explosive barrels to destroy houses more cheaply. We saw them do it with anti-tank weapons earlier in the war. Now they're doing it with massive barrel bombs. But as you can see, they detonate. You can see there, that's the D9 bulldozer in the convoy. Multiple vehicles were hit in that convoy by those Shoahs that were set up. And here we see trophy D9 bulldozers left behind. That bulldozer is flipped right over, and the fighter points that out. He says, here are the Qassam Brigade's fighters flipping over D9 bulldozers in Gaza with glory, which has always been the graveyard of invaders. And this guy says the same thing. We're going to burn it, and he burns the D9 armored bulldozer. So we're going to watch it just one more time, and I'll give you even more details on this, because this is a very detailed operation. These fighters are fighting these operations. So here the fighters are predicting the route of the vehicles again. So because of intelligence, surveillance, and drones, target acquisition through the use of tactical drones. If you look in the foreground of that, there's 2 grenades. Those are Qassam-built hand grenades. You look at the top of the screen there, you see Qassam-built tandem charge anti-tank weapons, building their own weapons, which has been the theme throughout this whole war. All of the weapons that you see used in these battles are built by Qassam. This fighter is holding Qassam weapons, saying that they're preparing the operation. And in that troop leading brief, the commander said, where we expect to meet them in the killing zone, there is a convoy of bulldozers, which we expect to be carrying heavy explosive devices, which will target and set off a chain reaction through the vehicles. So there's the Shoah device being set up. And again, I told you there's gunfire in the background here. He's setting it up, disguising it, moving through the streets, through the devastated terrain, as the Israeli military calls this type of battle space. As you can see, there's lots of places for the fighters to hide and move when the buildings are destroyed like this, and lots of places to hide the devices that are so devastating, killing batches of soldiers all week. 8 soldiers killed this week alone, just since you last saw me do this report. So these fighters, you can see the tandem there, tandem 85, with the freshly manufactured tip to make the second charge. So that's an interesting fact. We haven't actually seen too much direct evidence of seeing new Yassin's warheads in the field. But it's interesting because, of course, Jabaliya was the site of a major invasion, a month-long invasion back in May. which was the second invasion of Jabalia. So they need to restock their forces, and they're able to apparently do it locally and not have to pass these devices around. This fighter's going up with his Yassin to monitor the troops. You can hear the track of the vehicle, of the tanks and the bulldozers. You can hear the track squeaking, and he tells them to detonate from that fire position. And he's targeting these two D9 bulldozers. And watching this explosion, when they pause this explosion, you can see clearly the D9 right there. That's the top of the D9. So these operations, and it's one of the things that's amazing about these operations, is that we're watching real video filmed by the fighters, essentially giving us the frontline view with that tank flipped upside down, that bulldozer flipped upside down, something that we haven't quite seen in that way before. So very interesting operation in Sawafdi roundabout, which is in the very south of Jabalia, just basically on the border of northern Gaza City. So this is the southernmost area of Jabalia refugee camp for this battle. And the resistance is so fierce. We can go to the photos now. The resistance is so fierce that the Israelis are not coming back and taking their bulldozers. So what you're seeing right there is the burned out bulldozer. That bulldozer is going to stay in Jabalia for the next generation to look at, because Israel doesn't leave trophies like this behind. It's very interesting to see this. They normally would blow it up from the air. They may still do that. But to see those tanks, because Israel's tanks are used as monuments, both inside Israel, but also for people who have been to South Lebanon, their tanks are monuments in South Lebanon. In the 2006 war in South Lebanon, Israel literally dragged the vehicles down the mountain, and that was something that you could literally see carved into the mountain, because the flipped tanks were dragged on their heads back home, just so Hezbollah couldn't put them in the museum. So again, detailed operation. We'll go to the next one. That was a detailed operation being carried out by fighters that we were told, that the Israelis told didn't exist, multiple times. This is Sarai al-Quds, Islamic Jihad fighters. And this is interesting to note, because these fighters have one RPG-7 with a single charged warhead. This is not a tandem. They have one Yassin 105 tandem charge, and they're going to identify that tank there. And you can see the two of them here. They're going to do a combo shot, something we haven't seen all that much of. I try to point it out every time we do see it, because I think I get a lot of comments about it, that people wonder why they don't do this tactic more often. And you're going to see, interestingly, he fires the 85 millimeter single warhead first, and then the Yassin fires second. And that's what's happening in here. And he dedicates this action as he's firing. He says, "This is my sniper operation." In jest, because to say he's an archer, he's not a sniper. So an archer saying, "This is my sniper operation," because he's going to hit it. He's not going to miss. And he says, "Our camp, Jabalia camp, the camp of steadfastness, for we are blessed. We are the brothers of Sarai al-Quds and the brothers of Yahya Sinwar." A lot of these operations were shouting out Yahya Sinwar this week, of course, not unsurprisingly, by all factions. We can go to the next one, including Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade factions. This is an Israeli troop position. You can see the curtains there. In an otherwise completely destroyed building, they've got curtains on every window that they're in. This is small arms firing on them. We cut out the soldier. He comes to the window, soldier in a window, 13 months on. He comes to the window and he's hit with a thermobaric warhead. Not clear if these were the three people that were killed earlier in the week. Israel didn't line up the exact description of that, but that is a Qassam-built thermobaric warhead hitting an Israeli troop position. And just yesterday, Israel announced that, this is from a few days ago, but just yesterday they announced 4 Ghost unit soldiers in their special forces unit were killed in a booby-trapped house. So we may be seeing that operation in the coming days. That troop position being hit with a thermobaric warhead is not a pleasant experience for those on the receiving end. We can go to the next one. This is a twin Shoah. This is one of the 14 Shoah operations that happened in Gaza. They're setting it up, the fighters setting it up here, both in tactical vests, which is still an interesting development. Going through the streets, again, gunfire is the soundtrack to this. We try not to put the gunfire in because it trips up the AI algorithm. They don't want gunfire. So if you want to watch these full videos, you can see them on my Twitter account at John Elmer. Simple to find, but we do the best we can on here. And he's positioning it. You can see it being wired. He's hiding it. You can see it's on the road. He's trying to place it basically an optimal distance. He's not putting it out in the sand there because the optimal distance would be seen by the tank and would be avoided. So he's putting it a little bit behind the 1.5 meters that they would ideally be situating this device. You can see him. He's putting it in a bag. This fighter across the way is doing the same thing. They wire it up, they run the wires back to a safe position, and they wait for the vehicle to come into place. And one of these operations, and then using tactical drones here for surveillance, reconnaissance, and target acquisition, which is what NATO calls it, but clearly we're seeing Qassam use it here. You can see the armored vehicle convoy move through. They're going to get a Yassin strike here from this archer, and then you're going to see the medevac. And again, medevac well within range of an Al Ghul sniper rifle, not being targeted. You're also going to see, here we go, the tow truck. Call the tow truck. Call the tow truck for the 70-ton Merkava tank. Predicting the routes, the Israelis announced the next day after this operation that 3 tank soldiers were killed, tank crewmen were killed in the 460th Armored Brigade, and the brigade's chief of the tank school for commanders during peacetime was one of those killed. So 3 killed, including the tank commander, in a detailed operation carried out under fire by fighters that Israel cannot defeat and has not been able to defeat. Nothing that we're seeing in these videos is showing us any sign of anything different in the previous videos. Previous videos in January, when there was the most videos, we still saw the same numbers, 4, 6, no units bigger than that. That's why when Israel says they killed 50 people or dozens in a day, fighters, we've never seen any evidence that that's possible because they operate in small units and they don't sit in a house like the Israelis with 30 of them. They don't stand in the window. They don't put curtains up with neon colors and hang them only in the windows that your troops are in. So the likelihood of getting, not chunks of soldiers, like batches of soldiers, whatever, I'm sorry for the wording, but that's what the Israelis claim they get, 40, 50, 60 in a day. It's just lies. But we do know that 1,200 at least civilians were killed in this time, many of them women and children who fled the shelters that Israel then burned. Medevacs, still not firing on the medevacs. We saw Hezbollah fire on rescue operations, but we still don't see that happening by Qassam. Even, different religious, they're getting a different religious order than, because I guess they're assuming that those soldiers are injured soldiers, and the Prophet said not to attack wounded soldiers that are retreating. So so be it. So that is the resistance in Jabalia. Again, there was more than 50 operations this week. There was 3 sniper ops, 13 Shoah versus tanks, 7 Yassin versus tanks, 3 thermobaric warheads versus troop positions, 9 D9 bulldozers taken out by IEDs and Yassins, and 5 close quarters battles. Just remarkable battle in a disgusting genocide that Israel is doubling down on in the north. Brutal to watch.